Welcome back to You Be the Judge. Before the break, Tom, we were talking about the problems that veterans have pursuing their cases. And I guess one of the first and most significant is gathering records. And when you were down at Novo, you heard some war stories.
You hear some real horror stories about what the veterans go through. We have to understand that when these laws were originally put in place, they were put in place to assist the veterans coming back. And unfortunately, somewhere along the line, even though that when the VA goes in front of Congress looking for money, or the first thing they say is, well, we are here to help them. I find in dealing with the other lawyers who have been doing this some upwards of 30 years that, and I'm sure Terry has experienced that in some times where they're less than helpful. Really, the way the law was set up was that they're supposed to say yes to the veteran. That's their goal. But it seems to me that we find sometimes that's not really what's happening. They say no more often than they say yes, and it's gentlemen like Carrie who are doing their job every day with the American Legion, and then lawyers like myself who are certified to try and help veterans in getting the benefits that they have due coming to them. You know,
my final years in the Pennsylvania National Guard were spent down at Fort Indiantown Gap, working with the personnel section. And you saw how important a veteran's file was. And you would review the veteran, or not the veteran, you'd review the service member. Go through your file. Do you have all the awards? Do you have all of the orders? And things get lost. When I went on active duty, they made a mistake and sent me to Fort Bliss, Texas, without having sent me first to Fort Gordon, Georgia. I got to Fort Bliss, Texas, and some guy looked at my orders and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, this is the order I got." He said, "No, this is an amendment to an order, and the amendment sends you here, but the original order sent you to Fort Bliss." I said, "Well, no, my father got sick, and they gave me a deferment, so you can't come here without going to Fort Bliss." So I had to go back to Fort Bliss.
Where in the world is Todd O'Malley?
When I get to Fort Bliss, they want to know, who the hell are you and what are you doing?
Right.
Go on home.
Yeah.
We'll get you new orders. So when they finally got the new orders, I went down to Fort Bliss, and nobody had any pay records for me. Then I got to Fort Gordon. Then I got to Fort Bliss. I had a wife and 2 kids and hadn't had a paycheck in the 8 weeks that I'd been in the service. When I got down there, finally I had a great full colonel, a guy by the name of Colonel Mulligan. He said, "Come on, we're going to go to the pay office together." And he pounded the table and let those big chickens on his shoulders speak. And everybody said, "Well, we'll get an emergency voucher for you and get you paid." And then forever it took them to catch up. The only benefit to me is when it was time to get out, I got out about 4 months earlier because my date is the date I went in. And they said, "You're done." And the same was true when it was retirement time. But records can get messed up so easily in the military.
It's a huge problem for the Veterans Administration. They struggle to try and correct it. They do their best. Coming out today, a lot of veterans today. I just had one in my office this morning before I was coming up this area that had his own records. It's not uncommon anymore. They leave with their records. And I always tell the veteran, as soon as you're getting out, copy everything, because unfortunately this is a human error factor in this. Yep. And then human error, you got to give. There's mistakes.
Yeah, and interestingly, with regard to that, what I found out this weekend down at the NOVA conference was that Secretary Shinseki, who is now the Veterans Administration head, has come out and said that by 2015, that's their goal anyway, by 2015 they will be paperless, meaning there will no longer be a paper file. Now, can you imagine if those same electronic files now disappear? There'll just be nothing. Right. I mean, nothing will, and you won't have a copy of the paperwork, which is a great idea. Make a copy of your file before you leave.
But I instruct every one of them that come through my office to do that. And it's funny, I went through the microfiche age to the digital to the CD. I mean, I've got them all because I came through the service that way. But and they're also working on some programs. The FDC, I'm sure you've heard of that. Mm-hmm. It's a faster process, and I mean, it's a system that's been broke for so many years that there's a challenge to fix. But I've been down to the VA when I go down to Philadelphia for training. There's just piles and piles of files that you just can't imagine how they're going to connect in the process of the claim. How do you get all that information? Right. That's a challenge that they're going to definitely have to.
Particularly when we're in sequester.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we've been blessed out. I shouldn't say we. The Veterans Administration has been omitted from the budget, I guess, from what my understanding is.
We have a lawyer in this office, my age, went into the Marine Corps, spent 6 weeks in the basic training, blew his shoulder out. They sent him home. He's had 3 shoulder surgeries. Every time he applies to the Veterans Administration for benefits, they say, well, we don't have any record of you ever serving. And I've said to him, I said, the first thing you got to do is find somebody that was in that class with you. I mean, that's the only thing you can do to prove that you were there.
Right. A lot of veterans don't realize, and when they, let's, for the sake of discussion, if you have a claim, you can use a buddy letter as evidence that says, hey, I was present with Joe in this class and we served, and and I have a lot of guys that'll do, especially with the Vietnam Vietnam veterans. We have a lot of that where they have to have a buddy letter or they served with the gentleman, and that's additional evidence. I mean, that's all considered additional evidence that the VA has to weigh.
And quite frankly, what I found is that your hearing officers are sympathetic to buddy letters. They weigh them. If I went into court with a letter to a judge and said, this is what this guy's going to tell you, that's hearsay. We're not going to hear it. But they don't require you to bring a guy in from California.
No, they don't require you to physically have the person there. And I'll tell you what, the letters that I've experienced in my life, somebody should write a book. They're touching. I mean, these guys are telling a story, and it's a true story about what happened. They were in a conflict or they were in a situation, and the guys open it up, and a lot of times they tell you that's the best way to heal is to write it out and that's a part of the healing process. And I think some of these guys, these letters, that's why I think they use the letters as an asset.
Kerry, how many veterans officers do we have in northeastern Pennsylvania?
Let me do this. There's the American Legion, the VFW, the Disabled American Veterans. Each of them have service officers throughout the area.
And how many service
we
officers?
Have the building that we work out of, where we station out of Wilkes-Barre. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's assistants, girls in there. That's the clerical.
And you cover an area of how many counties? All the way from Carbon to Monroe, probably.
Yeah, I go to Susquehanna. I go to Monroe, Pike. We cover quite a few. We kind of work north of Harrisburg. Bucks. We do some work in Bucks.
And any idea how many veterans are living in that area?
They say that there's a huge amount of veterans in the Northeast. That we have a higher percentage up in this area. I've heard somebody say 600,000 at some point. I don't know if that's exact figure.
There's a great need.
There's a great need for it.
And there really aren't enough, as much as you guys are able to do. You could probably...
We can always use help, yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think having the outreach programs is a huge, because a lot of people, there's a great need, and there's a need for us, but there's also not an awareness of us. Yep. And I think you got to kind of collectively put that together.
When we come back, we're going to talk about some changes in veterans law that have meant to help veterans, including the establishment of the Court of Veterans Appeals and the involvement of lawyers now in veterans law. So please stay tuned to You Be the Judge. Pat O'Malley here from O'Malley & Langen. If you're used to wearing these, and now you're stuck home wearing these, you may have a disability that prevents you from working. Call us at O'Malley & Langen. We can help you get the Social Security benefits that you've earned.